You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Let's dive into a brand new episode. Before we get started on this episode, here's a not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed here. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 25 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. Steve isn't, nor does he offer any legal advice. For any legal advice, you must speak with a lawyer. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and search for author Steve Worsley. You can also take Steve's courses on Udemy or Skillshare, and you can find out more about those at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Toxic Mold Podcast. We're going to talk about something a little off topic in episode 174, Steve, right? We're going to talk about
Yeah. We can make it more like your episode.
Exactly. We're like She Runs the Show, which is kind of connected to it, because what we're talking about in this episode is a new podcast approach.
But tell our listeners what She Runs the Show.
Oh, She Runs the Show is my podcast that is dedicated to helping women entrepreneurs have both relationships that rock and businesses that thrive. Go. Yeah.
Got to give a plug to that.
Absolutely. So Steve and I have been working on this podcast for what is it, 2 years?
No, what? Well,
Longer?
we're at 174, so we're 2.5 years.
Wow, 2.5 years. Wow.
Yeah, 2019 in April, I believe, if I remember right.
It has definitely been a journey, and we have been thinking about what is the next level of this podcast. And one of the things that's become super clear is, with me running my business and Steve running his business, it has become super hard to make sure we get the consistency of doing interviews with each other on the Toxic Mold Podcast, right?
Yeah, this year, I mean, because of a surgery, we missed 1 week. That was the first week we had missed. Yeah. And just because we're so busy, there was about a month ago, we didn't do an episode for a couple weeks. And so it makes more sense to kind of move in a different direction so that we're not sporadic for our listeners.
Absolutely.
We want them to be able to know every week they get to hear my sexy voice.
Yeah, they do. Don't get me started. So, but here's the thing that we're shifting to, because I've got to move my focus more on my business and on getting my She Runs the Show podcast back up, writing a number of books, which are taking up all of my time. So Steve is now going to go on the journey of doing what I always do on She Runs the Show, which is solo episodes.
Yes, I can't wait. We did try, though, remember?
We did.
I didn't like it.
You didn't like it, but now you get to do all of that teaching and solo episodes, and I get to get my podcast and some other things in my business where they need to be.
Exactly. Yep. It'll be a little bit awkward for me because I'm not used to it, so it'll be a little bit of a transition, but we'll transition to that. And I love hearing from our listeners, so reach out to me, and if you have any advice, questions, topics, whatever you would like to hear more from me about, then just reach out, and I do this podcast for them.
Absolutely. And speaking of reaching out, if you know of anyone who is a specialist somehow related to mold and you think they would be a good guest on this podcast, Steve is going to start doing guest interviews early next year in 2023.
Yes. Yep. So if you know somebody that's, what is it called? Holistic doctor?
Yeah, like holistic functional medicine doctors.
Allergy doctor. Just anything that's mold related. It always helps to have a different point of view, so that we can. That's the reason that for me doing a solo podcast is it's kind of myopic, and I think everybody sees everything the way I see it. So
it's good to have. It'll be good to bring fresh guests and fresh voices in 2023. The other thing is, if you are someone who has a mold success story. So you are someone who's had mold in your home and you've gone through a journey and you've come out on the other side and you want to share your lessons as somebody who's lived with mold and gotten beyond it, then also reach out to Steve, because you might be a great guest for the show.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that, but it's great to hear, from those that have gone through the detox process. And, I can talk till I'm blue in the face, but until I've done it, it's, I want our listeners to hear other people's perspectives.
Absolutely. And, some people call those stories of hope, but sometimes when you're going through mold sickness or mold illness and you have to move your family out of your home, you feel like this is never going to end. Hearing the story of somebody who's been there and who's on the other side of it is very helpful.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I didn't think about that, but previous people that have had mold toxicity. So that would be awesome too. And we're not going to do it every week that we're going to have a guest, but it is something, like you said, we want to start in 2023.
Absolutely. And then, another idea that we've been tossing around is the whole idea of case studies, because you've seen a lot of interesting CSI investigation-like cases. And so perhaps doing a solo episode where you deep dive, without giving any names or specifics, but you deep dive into some cases of mold investigation that you've conducted and how you thought about it and approached it might be interesting to listeners too.
Yeah, she's talking about this book I've been trying to write for 2 years. So I got you. I get it.
Exactly.
It's almost done. That's the crazy part. I just need to finish it. But yeah, the next book's a case study book, and I know you listeners have heard about it. But yeah, that would be great for a podcast too. Probably a lot easier than writing the book.
Well, now you just threw in another idea that I have for this. You could actually use some of the solo episodes to do almost like a book reading teaching through each of your books.
Oh, okay.
So you could do an episode, 3 or 4 episodes that are on the mold epidemic, and then 3 or 4 episodes on, black mold and home inspections. And that way you're walking people through key concepts in each of your books.
Yeah, that
and you could do a series to go over all the books.
Right. Yeah, and it because what's interesting, and I know our listeners know this, but every mold situation's different. Everybody's bodies are different. Everybody's homes, defects, moisture intrusion events, and I think it helps for a lot of people to know that they're not the only one that they had a sewage backup that caused all this damage, and so that would help too, so that our listeners don't feel like they're on an island by themselves.
Exactly. So what you're hearing from us is there's going to be a new format coming moving forward, and in 2023 there are going to be lots of new interesting things coming.
Yeah, and I'll get that case study book
done
probably by 2025.
Sooner rather than later, right?
I hope.
Yes. So where should people reach you at info@CNC Contractor Services if they have guest ideas?
Yes.
Yes.
Go to info@cnccontractorservices.com. And those that have reached out, I've had a lot of listeners that reach out for some reason, and I don't know what it is. Even my personal account that's through the website, for some reason my responses they end up in their junk folder. So just make sure if you do reach out, please monitor your junk folder, because I do respond to everybody.
Absolutely.
But a lot of times I never hear back from those people, and I think most people would respond and say thanks or something, and I just get no responses. So I think a lot of it ends up in their spam folder. So make sure you go to info@cnccontractorservices.com, send me an email. I'll respond, but make sure, it might take me a couple days, but monitor your junk folder, and I will respond to you.
Absolutely. And it would be super helpful if when you email info@cnccontractorservices.com, in the subject line you put I'd like to be a guest or guest idea in the subject line, so that as we go through all of these emails, we know exactly what you're referring to.
Yep. And just keep in mind too, obviously you know this, you've done your podcast for way longer than I ever have. Well, you're the one that got us to start this. That not everybody gets to be on the podcast.
Correct.
We don't, we are a business. We have a reputation we have to maintain. So, if you do reach out, it's nothing personal. But I can't always have, everybody on the podcast. If I feel it's not relevant, or it might take us down a rabbit hole I don't want to take us down, I just won't have someone on the podcast, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's got to be the right fit for both of us.
Yes, exactly.
So we'll definitely read your emails. We will respond to let you know we've gotten your email, but that doesn't necessarily mean you will be a guest.
Yep.
On the
and
show.
Before you're on, we make sure, as you guys all, guys and gals, that you all do know, we don't get political, or, there's areas we won't get into. And so just keep that in mind.
Absolutely. We don't do medical advice because we're not doctors.
No.
We don't do legal advice because we're not lawyers.
Nope.
We don't get into personal drama because that's not meant for the public.
Exactly.
And the last part is we really focus on telling stories that educate everyone.
Yep. No politics is one of the biggest. So everybody has their own, and that's okay. But we don't need that represented on CNC's Contractor Services or the Toxic Mold Podcast.
Absolutely.
We're not going there.
So we are so thankful for all of you who listen on a regular basis. I have loved doing this podcast with Steve. Now my own podcast and my business require my attention. So I will be taking my leave, but I wanted to say thank you, everybody, for the level of support you've shown for the podcast. Please continue to share this with people you know need to hear it. Yep.
Yeah, we're over, as of right now, we're pretty close to 50,000 listens. Wow. So it's this podcast, each episode, every episode we're getting higher and higher as far as listens per episode. So I appreciate all of you guys. It's like I said, it's tough to try to record a podcast every week, and we have loyal listeners that join us every week. So we appreciate that.
We definitely do. Well, thank you everyone for listening. We will Steve will catch you on the next podcast episode.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you go to our website at cnccontractorservices.com and sign up for the mold investigation checklist. Again, go to cnccontractorservices.com and get your free mold investigation checklist today. You can also, on cnccontractorservices.com, find out more about Steve's courses and books and consultations. Once again, go to cnccontractorservices.com.